Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? It is Thursday, November 19th, 2020. I can't find anything numerically significant about that date. So, time for another show. Regardless, we'll just say it's Thursday. And that means one more shot anyway, so far this week. With Greg Dworkin, trying to wrap up some, summary of what the news is, if there is such a thing. I don't know. I'm about ready to give up at this point. I learned so much each day about how many things are falling apart. And, I don't know. We'll see how many of them we can fit into today's show. Bill in Portland, Maine lets us know that it is time for the show to begin. That's how I know when to come on the air each day. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. That's my signal to turn on the microphone and begin the show. Apparently, Republicans are back at it in Wayne County. This is true. I have the latest. That's good. No one else has anything later than me, and that's good news. Caution, this could get wacky. I told you yesterday that it was a wacky week, and it has gotten wackier. When we left yesterday, all of this took place earlier, of course, and so maybe you already know the news, but let's see. On Tuesday night, I think, right? We remember the Wayne County, Michigan Board of Canvassers met, and I don't know whether they fought bitterly or not, but a lot of people yelled at one another on Zoom, and we got the benefit of seeing some of that. The upshot of it was, at first, that the two Republican members of the four-member board were dead set against voting to approve the official elections results for Wayne County and then report them onto the state. But they then they had the big fight. The plan was, if we don't certify the results to the state, then the state will have to either try and find some way of certifying those results themselves, which they can do, or everybody will just realize that Trump won and they'll just let him be president for another 4 years or maybe 8 years, because the first 4 years were stolen from him, as you know, by the investigations into his awesomeness, I guess, is what they would believe. We all know about those stories. Anyway, they were locally, nationally, and internationally shamed in near real time for what they were doing, and ultimately reversed themselves. And so everybody had a nice feel-good story about how they bashed these two idiots over the head enough to get them to change their mind. That was yesterday's report. But as it turns out, even before Tuesday night ended, this is apparently the clips that I put aside tell a larger story that has taken another day or so to filter down to the rest of us. I guess as soon as they were done striking what they thought was that weird bargain, we'll vote to certify the vote for the county so long as we get some sort of guarantee from the state canvassers that they'll conduct a thorough audit of the vote, either statewide or in, possibly just in their county. I don't know what kind of deal they thought they had. I don't know whether the other side acknowledges that there was any sort of deal. I don't know if they're making it up. Who knows? I mean, I could get a report from people on the ground, but what good would it do you, given that one of the supposed parties to the deal is totally delusional and can make up anything they want? Anyway, long story-ish short there, the Board of Canvassers, these two nuts on the board, have since, filed affidavits in what, I don't know what sort of proceeding they think they're heading into. They're essentially attempting to rescind their votes to agree to certify the vote of the county and send it on to the state, which I would tell you ordinarily is not a thing you can do. So don't worry about it normally, except now you have to worry about it because anything goes at this point, and who knows what kind of judge they get in front of and how many they appeal to, and shop around for a court that will just say, no, it's not a thing that you can do. But in this instance, I'll allow it. Not, it's, my decision is not subject to appeal. Get that to the United States Supreme Court. I guess that's still the plan. An option they're keeping open for themselves, even though they have also indicated that it's their hope that they can short circuit even that by getting the state legislatures to agree, well, it would be, why bother the courts with all of this? We'll simply step in and appoint different electors. We are getting close. We're probably about 2 weeks now from the safe harbor date, but, we've explained what that's about, and that's the date before which, so long as states, using whatever process they've decided for themselves, appoint their electors to the Electoral College, the courts won't step in and second-guess them. But as you know, that is a legal rule, and those don't exist anymore. So I'm not even certain what good it is to mark that date on your calendar anymore. But just as a remembrance of the old days when there were laws, we'll remind you that Safe Harbor Day is coming up. That means that courts will be under some pressure to act quickly on some of these things. So far, when they have acted with dispatch, they have acted as expected, properly, and thrown most of these cases out. I just want to let you know that these guys are out there saying, no, we didn't vote that, or if we did, it was totally because they made us and we thought we had some other crazy deal, even though we didn't. And so therefore, yes to certifying the Wayne County vote. The state considers, of course, the action to have been taken. The votes, the certified votes of the county are in their hands, and they'll proceed as planned. And I guess now we'll see whether, I don't know, you can go on right-wing radio and rile up some militia types to come and execute some sort of assault on the state board of canvassers while they meet, and see if they can steal away the certificate that says that Wayne County indeed voted yes to certify their vote, or something like that. Maybe they can shoot a flaming arrow through the parchment while it's on its way to the to the courthouse. There are all sorts of options available to people who don't believe in anything and just feel like if they can beat up the right person, they'll get their way. So that's kind of the setting for the morning. Greg Dworkin is here, and I didn't coerce him at all. This was entirely up to him. I just sat here. The phone rang. You heard it. I answered. No force involved. You can't catch me. That's for sure. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. I think the theme for this morning is going to be, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. That was Upton Sinclair, originally said in 1905 when he serialized The Jungle.
But that guy doesn't understand anything. He's getting paid.
1906 is when The Jungle was published. Now, that quote isn't from The Jungle. It's just from Sinclair campaigning. He ran for governor of California and lost as a socialist.
I see.
But, The Jungle is relevant because, by the way, it turns out we find that Tyson meatpacking executives were betting on how many of their employees were going to come down with COVID.
Yes.
That's a thing. So, here it is more than 100 years later, and it's a reminder of how come the government regulates business.
Yeah, well, I think they can all be relied upon to do the right thing on their own.
Sure, but you got to watch them a little.
Right, like watch them do these bets.
Or
and you want to watch
Ronald
them.
Reagan, the great conservative, used to say, trust but verify.
Right, or don't, as
verify
Donald Trump said.
So this Wayne County thing is kind of amusing, but it goes with the theme here.
Yeah.
How come they're rescinding? Well, only one of them is rescinding. Actually,
is that right? I thought
Caleb Rubel, who is a investigative reporter on the ground there, says as if it couldn't get any wilder at the Wayne County Board of Canvassers. You might as well have said wackier in line with your theme.
Yes,
the Republican members are now seeking to rescind certification, despite the fact that the motion officially passed, certification papers were signed, and records were sent to the Secretary of State in the morning yesterday. So while Monica Palmer, who's head of the board, and a fellow named Hartman, who's the racist Q following wacko, have signed affidavits seeking to revoke the certification, Vice Chair Kinloch, who's Democrat and sounds like a smart parliamentarian, assures me the deal is already done, lawsuits withstanding. As election lawyers have explained to me, the deadline is a hard stop, and the deadline was yesterday.
Yes. And I'm just going to call out that they mean to say deadlines notwithstanding or deadlines withstanding, which is what was actually said. I don't know, and I don't know whether they mean that or didn't mean that, or
he says lawsuits withstanding. She meant lawsuits notwithstanding. Maybe there wasn't enough characters in Twitter. What people likely missed on Tuesday night, after Wayne County canvassers voted to certify, Kinloch introduced a second motion waiving reconsideration, meaning the board wouldn't be able to revisit explicitly because he suspected the Republicans would come under pressure.
Okay.
And she put that under the hashtag foresight.
Yes.
The deal brokered with Dem canvassers occurred after 3 hours of passionate testimony from Wayne County residents calling out the Republicans for attempting to disenfranchise hundreds and thousands of black and brown voters. In Michigan's most populous, diverse, and bluest county, the more you dig in, the worse it gets. As I said, the Republican fellow is a Q devotee. And this Monica Palmer sounds like a piece of work out of Grosse Pointe.
Yes.
And a whole thing about her supporting Grosse Pointe schools over Detroit. Grosse Pointe is really into building physical walls and barriers, cutting off roads from Detroit to separate the white and the black people.
Oh.
It's an amazing place and an amazing story, and it just rings a bell with me because I'm from Yonkers, New York, and Yonkers did the same back when I was growing up. Yonkers actually built roads that didn't intersect with each other. You know, if you take your two hands and you put your fingers so that the fingers like interdigitate there, that's how the roads worked from one section to another. Wherever the public housing was, the roads would not go into that area. They deliberately made them so that they stop and there's a barrier. And so I'm quite familiar with how that works. That's why Yonkers was under a court order desegregation program for when I was growing up. You needed it because the way the communities were built, the housing was the de facto segregation of the North. I mean, this is old stuff, but it still happens in Grosse Pointe. That's where she represents. And so she is under an ethics investigation for conflict of interest over votes. So that's who she is. But for the point of the story, despite the fact that they're both terrible people, the fact is that she filed an affidavit, which I guess is just going to a notary and saying, I want this. I don't think it's like a court thing.
I don't know. I'm not certain. No reporting on that.
I want to rescind. He didn't say I want to rescind. He just said I don't support the vote. Mm-hmm. Neither one matters. They're just statements. The vote's done, and this is going to happen. So what is it? It's under pressure from Republicans to back Trump's idiocy and non-democratic, small d, actions. They're afraid. And so even though they were sort of like conscience forced into doing the right thing, they slept on it and decided that their political future depended upon them doing the Upton Sinclair thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay.
I mean, it's all about that. You can't expect them to understand something when their salary depends on their not understanding it.
I don't even know if they get a salary.
But they have business contacts and they have all sorts of stuff, and this is all an interdigitated, not direct way. And so who's putting pressure on them? Well, those stories will come out. But that's part of the background. So meanwhile, two other things of note that are related to give you the same flavor of what's going on here. Here's a piece in Politico, which is stupid on the face of it, stupid when you read it, but revealing nonetheless. Traitors to the president. Conservatives fear public preparation for a Biden term because Trump won't concede, and think of these people back in Wayne, so it's at the local level, it's at the national level, because Trump won't concede, many conservatives have found they can't be open about their plans to counter Biden's agenda. Some have already faced blowback. And the reason this is stupid is because it's actually, as you read it, a lament that conservatives can't gin up the anti-Biden conservative mighty Wurlitzer, to claim a term from 10 years ago, because they're frozen. Because Biden hasn't won, they can't attack him. And if they try to attack him, Trump attacks them for implying that Biden won. Right? It's funny, right?
Yes.
But the point is, they're afraid. And so none of them
fear.
are telling you what they really think. They're all liars. apply it to Wayne, and you understand why these people are doing what they're doing with all of the kabuki. The vote goes on, but they have to have the appearance of being on the Trump train. Otherwise, they're afraid for their jobs and their future because they're Republicans. That's just the way it is right at the moment. As stupid as it is, that's the way it is. There's this other story from the Washington Post. As defeats pile up, Trump tries to delay vote count in last-ditch attempt to cast doubt on Biden victory. That's what this is. This is them claiming, oh, we were pressured, therefore it's not real, therefore you shouldn't really believe it, when Michigan on Monday says, it's certified and he won. But Michigan is going to certify on Monday, and he won, and so, they only have a couple more days of this.
Okay.
Simultaneously, Georgia is set to announce their hand recount of Fulton County, I think, this afternoon at noon. So naturally, because that's happening, Trump decides he's going to have a press conference at noon to go over the pieces falling in place so that he can outline his victory plan.
I see.
Run by Rudy Giuliani. Or here's the quote. Donald J. Trump, important news conference today by lawyers. That's a loose use of the word if you're talking about Rudy. Yeah. On a very clear and viable path to victory, pieces are very nicely falling into place. RNC at 12 p.m. As Randy Rainbow retweeted it, he added, where's this one being held, sweetie? IHOP?
Why not?
Why not? And this from a physicians group, it looks like, physicians.org. Analysis of Trump tweets reveals systemic diversion of the media. The international study led by the University of Bristol in the UK tested two hypotheses, whether an increase in harmful media coverage was followed by increased diversionary Twitter activity, and if such diversion successfully reduced subsequent media coverage of the harmful topic. And our analysis presents empirical evidence consistent with the theory that whenever the media reports something threatening or politically uncomfortable for President Trump, think the Georgia recount, his account increasingly tweets about unrelated topics representing his political strengths. This systematic diversion of attention away from a topic potentially damaging to him was shown to significantly reduce negative media coverage the next day. So that's his strategy. He's doing it for a purpose. The media plays into it, which is why we've been lambasting the media for the last 4 years, but they do it anyway. Or as Jim Acosta said, we have to. We'll cover the blowhard a lot less after he's not president, but while he's president, we sort of have to do this. So, that's what's going on with the news conference. They have nothing, and they're trying to make as much of nothing as they possibly can in the few days that they have left to do it. But again, as Robert Costa reports, as defeats pile up, and this is another defeat, Trump tries to delay vote count and last-ditch attempt to cast doubt on Biden victory. That's what they're doing. And the Biden camp, in response, is doing stuff behind the scenes. They're not ready to confront Trump because they figure that'll just make people like GSA Emily dig in even harder.
Okay.
Sympathetic stories about her starting to, she has such difficulty trying to decide what to do. It's so hard.
Well.
And actually, let me pull up something I didn't send you, but I do have, which I thought was kind of interesting. And that is kind of an explanation about people who actually work with the behind the scenes in the White House Trump folks. And this is from Carrie Cordero,
okay,
who is a national security specialist, and Robert M. Gates, senior fellow and general counsel, CNA SDC, legal and national security analyst, CNN, adjunct professor, Georgetown Law. Those are her credentials. This will be an unpopular take, but one thing I can say, after 4 years of speaking privately with some current and former Trump appointees, is that some of them truly internally struggle and personally anguish over their roles and decisions. Now, wait, don't get mad at her because she has more to add. And she says, I can't relate because I made very different decisions professionally, but their anguish is very real for them. What I can say is that each has a different breaking point of what they can and cannot tolerate or stand by for, and each makes its own decisions about how to jump off the ship or not. So GSA Emily, who is Emily Murphy, the one who has to certify whether the transition can take place and get funding, should know that she is not the first to walk this road, but she will need to dig deep to have the courage to do her part for the country, as the current transition stall is unsustainable. And as I've signed on to here, my strong view, Carrie Cordero, is the transition must get on with it. The national security is at stake, and all I'll add to respond to the many angry replies to this thread is that one should not equate my articulation of observation with sympathy. That, and you probably are not familiar with my work and engagement over the past 4+ years. She's one of the good guys. She's just pointing out that when you talk to them, they all sort of think to themselves that they're trying to do the right thing. Now, judgment isn't very good, or they wouldn't be there in the first place, or they wouldn't still be there. But that's what she's reporting. And so, again, you go back and you apply that to the Wayne County people. On the one hand, there's an incredible amount of pressure on them from Republicans. And on the other hand, they do sort of feel like somewhere deep down inside that they sort of want to do the right thing. So they did on Tuesday night and then rescinded it under pressure when it didn't matter. And, that's just, it's all kabuki. It's all show.
Well, so much of the government is. So
yeah, exactly. But so much of the government is actually... And when people were reporting to this, again, you play this down whenever I bring it up. But
I do. Okay.
Yeah.
What is it?
Because you're a parliamentary
what is this
expert,
stupid
and
thing?
you've taught me about this stuff for years and years and years.
Okay.
And the reason it matters so much is what that vice chair did. He got them to say, okay, it's certified, and then he got them to pass a resolution that says, black, no take back.
Yeah.
And
right. Why do I downplay
sticks,
that?
And it matters. And so now you go back and say, okay, well, I want to have a press conference about what I really think based on the pressure that I was told to say. It doesn't matter because the rules are rules and it's already done. And the deadline's passed and you can't do anything about it. But I'm not going to push that in your face. I'm just going to nod my head and say that's very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing, and then move on. And who wins? The parliamentarian.
Yes, typically, yeah, that's the case. I have to downplay it in the Trump era only because I say there's another branch that has gavels, and they're a meddlesome bunch, and some of them are like 13 years old and have no legal training whatsoever and are sitting on the federal bench for life, and they cause problems. And, there's the backstop of, they have to get through the appeals courts and then finally the Supreme Court. And it's filled with people who, look like they're serious and like to stroke their chins and be consistent when they can. But that was yesterday. And now it's full of people who hate everything.
Well, but let me put it a different way then. Okay?
All right.
Because the rules don't guarantee who wins.
That is true.
But they do lay out how you set up the battlefield and how the battle's going to be fought.
Right. That is true.
And so that's what happened here.
Yeah.
The guy said,
all
right.
No doubt about that.
You're playing politics. I'm going to set it up so that, number one, you're going to go ahead and certify this. I'll give you a compromise and a face-saving way out, an exit ramp, as we talked about yesterday. But I'm also going to add something that destroys the exit ramp as soon as you're off so you can't get back on.
Yeah, although...
Now, will it succeed? That's what he did. That's what I'm talking about. Do I guarantee that it'll work? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that's what he did. Let's understand what he did.
Yeah. Well, I understand what he did. I think it was the right thing to do. Everyone should do that. But
so often that's in fact what happens. Yeah. And so when you have the difference between, in this, term limits and all the other things we may talk about, it's really helpful if you have somebody who understands the rules.
Yes, always helpful. The rule here is you set things up this way. Now, the reason you set things up this way is because you know that should this go to court, you're going to look an awful lot better in court. Now, there's really no viable path to and through court on this situation.
Well, first it has to, in this case, it has to go through the state canvassing board, which is not going to, let this happen.
Right. Again, unless they find somebody who will say, I'm willing to sign an emergency injunction against the state canvassing board meeting in the first place. Wow. Okay. Now he's delaying the gavel that's supposed to make this thing final, after all. And he's got his own gavel. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah, we're going to certify it on Monday is what we're going to do about it.
Yep.
That's why it's nice to have the governorship. Can you imagine what would happen in Michigan if there was a Republican governor?
Yeah, well, I think we can imagine it. I don't know if I could describe it ahead of time, but it would be pretty wild.
Yeah, people would have thought you were wacky if you tried to describe it ahead of time.
All right. Well, at any rate, yes. I mean, essentially what it comes down to is There's good reason to believe that none of this will work because it's not supposed to, and there are a lot of people who are in position to say, yeah, it's not supposed to, and I have a gavel, and I'm normal.
Not only that, okay, you're also talking about invalidating Republican wins locally and statewide.
Right, unless they
so
say,
there's a lot of pressure to not do this.
Yeah. Again, logic is one of those crazy rules that sometimes work, sometimes don't. I don't know why the judge ruled.
And so I'll
this
sum
part of
up
the
this
ballot
whole
is valid
segment with Paul Blumenthal reporting in HuffPost, Donald Trump's effort to steal the election is comically stupid and extremely dangerous.
Yes.
Trump's last scandal may be his greatest and his stupidest.
I'll agree with that.
Right? I mean, while the lawsuits in court were pretty laughable, Rudy Giuliani being a great example of America's clown, I'm sorry to insult clowns, this felt a lot more real, a lot more insidious, a lot more meaningful, because in theory, this could, in fact, have gone the route not of the Supreme Court, as we talked about yesterday, but actually going to the House if you delay everything and mess everything up. And even if you fail, you're casting doubt on Biden's legitimacy. And more on that when we get back, because there's some polling about how Fox News Republicans look at this versus like everybody else in the world.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess it's important in a way to know how they think and what they feel so that
they're going to lose. I mean, this isn't the question of who winds up winning this battle. It's just, again, what's the battlefield here? Right.
Well, okay. So we'll check in with them, and I guess, I'll acknowledge that it's important to know what they're thinking and why, even if it's not really thinking. What can I tell you? We're in a crazy time. I described it, maybe last Friday or something. This is like quantum physics. We're in quantum constitutional law territory, and while all these rules normally work, you can still look to the books and say, not in a black hole. It doesn't. It's absolutely.
It's Schrodinger's election. Is that what you're saying?
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. More philosophical musings and physical and metaphysical musings about the nature of law, our government, existence, being, states of nature, whatever else we might want to throw in there. We're in, like I said, in quantum con law territory, like we discussed last week, and it's part of it is just an observable universe only. You will have to wait and see what happens.
I'm
and what
sort of an anti-nihilist when it comes to this. I figure when you go back and you look at the rules and see where the rules didn't work, then you go back and you write new rules. You don't just throw up your hands and say, okay, well, nothing matters.
Right. Well, you have to write rules to get out of the situation that you're in. And then, but the only constant is that, let's say, close enough to a large enough gravitational field, your rules stand a chance of being pulled apart again. The way I look at it is the rules, let's write rules. This is what they did.
Yes. Based on good faith. And now that we're in real world, it's okay. Next time, let's write rules that don't assume good faith. For example, how about not having a certification canvassing board that's 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats? How about 2, and 1 neutral?
Yes. Well, we did
Just a simple example of
through-
how you could rewrite rules and just like make it work next time.
Yeah.
Because don't assume good things.
Minus my only we discussed this a little bit yesterday. Although why not throw that out there? You should be thinking about it. The only question is, okay, I am what's her name, Monica Palmer. I'm Martin Palmer, and I'm an independent. Wink, wink. Put me on the board. You know, I don't know how you get on the board. I guess it's elected, and if you have enough Republicans say, I'm a Republican. I have always been a Republican. Today I'm an independent for purposes of this election. Well, now I'm on the board. Awesome. I'm so independent. I vote with the two Republicans every day. So I don't know how you define it, whether you get to beat the person up if they're not really an independent or kick them just a little bit. You know,
well, the Supreme Courts basically do it, forgetting about that, and they just have an odd number.
Yeah.
You know, like the Wisconsin Supreme Court or the Michigan Supreme Court.
Yeah.
You know, and you can have, but you could also get rid of electing your judges.
You can do that. You can have them appointed by crazy presidents.
I'm not saying that any one is the rule that you must follow, but there's ways to do that. So let's look at voters who voted already. This is new information from Navigator Research. Kind of interesting. And we talked about this. Let me preface it, though, with a nice piece that's in the New York Times from Wajat Ali, who says, reach out to Trump supporters. They said, I tried. No. I give up. I've been doing it for like 4 years. It ain't working. And too long didn't read. We cannot help people who refuse to help themselves. Trump is an extension of their id, their culture, their values, their greed. He's their defender and savior. He's their blunt instrument. He's their destructive drug of choice. Don't waste your time reaching out to Trump voters like I did. Instead, invest your time organizing your community, registering new voters, and supporting candidates who reflect progressive values that uplift everyone. Fine, I agree when it comes to the basic Trump voter.
All right.
Who's simply looking for some way to champion the idea that I still want to live in Grosse Pointe and I want to build barriers. And if you say that I can't, then I don't like you. White House kill deal to pay for mental health care for migrant families separated at the border. Sources said the White House counsel's office said no. After checking with Trump advisor Stephen Miller, a White House official denied Miller had a role, which means Miller had a role. So when you ask the Nazi about whether or not you should give mental health care for the migrants, he says no, and so you don't. And, you know, these are horrible people. I'm not talking about supporting folks who vote for him. But there's others, and so on the margins, which is how elections are won, they're never unanimous. On the margins is how you win. You convince independents. You convince people to vote for one guy, but also vote for this other guy. And that's where the Navigator information comes in so handy. And that's basically what we were talking about during the election. Nobody's saying abandon your base in a base election in order to get all of these Trump voters to suddenly vote for you. It's the I'm not sure people. How many are there? Maybe they're 3%. In fact, let's look at the numbers because we have some numbers here. Here are the key takeaways. This analysis seeks to understand several critical voting blocks that were ultimately determinative in the election, and this includes Trump to Biden voters. That was 3% of their sample, and it was a pretty large sample. It was in the thousands. A small but important group of voters who switched from voting for Trump in 2016 to voting for Biden in 2020. These voters appear drawn in by Biden's offer of unity and repelled by Trump's handling of the pandemic. Is 3% a lot? Well, what were the margins in Georgia and in Arizona and in Wisconsin? They were a lot less than 3%. So, you know, this is an important group of voters here, even though it's a small group of voters. And so if that's who you're aiming at, you know, the fact that a Trump voter who is like all in and goes to rallies is deplorable, really is, you know, that has nothing to do with aiming what you're talking about to these voters. Trump to Biden voters, 3% of the sample. Then there were New Democrats, 11% of the sample. A larger group of voters who were either too young to vote or sat on the sidelines in 2016 by staying at home or supporting a third-party candidate. These are generally more progressive voters motivated by dislike for Trump and the opportunity for positive change. So when you go out and you do your field work, which was limited by the pandemic, these are the folks you're trying to get out. And it was 11% of the sample. Might have been bigger had it not been for the fact that the Democrats decided to curtail their, field work based on the fact that it's a responsible thing to do to try to not kill your voters. The opposite,
Yes.
happened with Trump voters, and they went out and they ignored all of that, and they did what they did, and they were able to bring out 9% of the sample, voters that kept Trump competitive, who backed him after sitting out 2016 or backing somebody else. These mostly conservative voters have some conflicted opinions about the president, but are overwhelmingly positive about his economic approach. And so they went out and did the field work and got these people to show it was less than the New Democrats, and it was less than the New Democrats plus Trump to Biden voters, who add up to 14 as opposed to 9. That's how you win the election. And yet, in doing that and getting their 9% out, they probably doomed North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and places in the Midwest to a horrible pandemic right now because, they didn't want to do any restrictions. So, yeah, they got what they needed for the election, which is to lose. And then at the same time, they're destroying that part of the country. Congratulations. I'm glad you got what you wanted. But other important groups included are the Biden Republican splitters, 3% of the sample. These voters backed a Republican down ballot while voting for Joe Biden to be president. They're relatively moderate, they're relatively college educated, dislike Trump, disapproved of his pandemic response, but they like the economic approach, and that's why they supported Republicans. And then 3% were Trump Democrat splitters. Okay. These voters are relatively conservative in their disposition and almost universally approved of how Trump had handled the economy, though they backed the president with some reservations and stuck with the Democrat down ballot. These are the old-fashioned Reagan Democrats. They voted down ballot Democrats, but they voted for Trump. And they were about the same as the Biden Republican splitters. What they don't have here is I voted for Biden, but I didn't vote for anybody down ballot, which is one of the reasons why Democrats did a little bit worse than people expected. And yet, on the whole, they actually didn't do that bad, considering the seats they lost were in red areas. And, it's not automatic that in a presidential year you're going to do well. Expectations were high, but, maybe they shouldn't have been.
Yes, well, possibly. I mean, the numbers...
Now, analysis of voters who said they voted for Biden but a Republican down ballot, they were R plus 21 in identification. See, that's the point. If you're taking, it's like those conservative, I don't know what I'm going to do groups that Frank Luntz put together. And you look at them and say, you're all conservatives.
Yeah.
Well, I know how you're going to vote in the end. You're all conservatives. But the point is, they were all conservatives. So the people who voted for Biden but a Republican down ballot were R plus 21, relatively moderate in the suburbs. 65% had an income greater than $50,000, and 71% hated Donald J. Trump. These are the people you picked up in the suburbs. But these suburban voters, which is how Biden wound up winning in a lot of the battleground states, were not necessarily conducive to Democrats down ballot. That gets to the whole discussion we had the other day, and it isn't a question of pointing fingers as who came up with the slogan, but these folks are not necessarily amenable to defund the police. Doesn't matter who came up with the slogan.
Yeah.
Right? If the other side is going to use it to weaponize against voting for Democrats, the socialist thing doesn't matter here. It would in Florida, but not here. But that's the kind of campaign that would favor Republicans, but not necessarily Democrats. If you want to win the House in these reddish areas with R plus 21 people who would still vote for Biden, you have to come up with a different campaign, or at least you have to counter that campaign, or you have to do field work to get whatever moderates and progressives there are in these areas, but there may not be many because we're talking about red suburbs.
Yeah.
So you can't always, run the campaign you want. Sometimes you have to run the campaign you need.
Yeah.
Are they gettable? They're relatively progressive on key policy debates. But as many people have said, and it's annoying and we hate it, brand matters. If you're used to voting Republicans and the Republican brand is good on the economy and good on law and order and defense, even though it's not true, you've got to figure out a way to run against that brand. If your brand, the Democratic Party, for whatever reason in those areas is weak on whatever, you've got to figure out a way to get around that. We'll see how that plays out in Georgia, because we've got two very good, chances to pick up a Senate seat there. We need both to get control of the Senate. We'll see how that plays out, because you know how the other side's going to play it.
Sure.
And it isn't a question of again, looking at the battle. It's not a question of guaranteeing who's going to win. You got to look at the battlefield and how it's laid out so that you have an idea of how the battle's going to happen. And you know that, for example, the Democrats are going to run against Perdue and Loeffler as being crooks.
Yes. Well, why not?
And the Republicans are going to run against the Democrats as godless socialists who want to take your guns.
Yes.
I mean, it's Georgia. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen everywhere.
But that's where the election is right now.
Yes.
The rest of the election's over already. So, how are you going to mobilize your folks to come out? And, that's where people on the ground who are experts in how you do it in Georgia need to be listened to, as opposed to national people from, like, Connecticut telling you how to do it.
You're from Connecticut.
What do we know about Connecticut, right?
Yeah, right. I don't know. Okay, but okay, fair warning. but do you listen to a person from Connecticut? You can, because a person from Connecticut who says listen to people from Georgia is okay. You're supposed to listen to that, but not this is how you should do it in Georgia. Even if what you're saying is you should do it in Georgia by listening to Georgians. But Georgians will tell you that. That's the point. If you can match what the Connecticut people and Georgians are saying, then you're on the right track. Okay, maybe that's the rule.
Right. No true Scotsman would put sugar on his porridge. So Natalie Jackson from PRRI says there's a new report. 40% of Republicans say they most trust Fox News for accurate news out of a list of TV sources. They're different from the other 60% of Republicans.
Okay.
Right? 60, all Americans. Fairness of the presidential election, 57% say it's okay. Right. Fox News Republicans consider this a critical issue. 72% of Fox News Republicans consider fairness of the presidential election a critical issue. Non-Fox Republicans, 44%.
How many percent?
44% of non-Fox Republicans think that fairness in this election was a big deal. 72% of Fox News Republicans do. You get on the news and Fox News, you're being indoctrinated to the idea that it's not fair.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's what underlies it. It's odd. I think fairness is important.
Right,
not much Fox at all.
67% of Fox News Republicans think it's a critical issue. Only 46% of all Americans do.
Yeah. All right. So what they mean is it's a critical issue and the fairness is missing. And that's critical. That's
the way they see it. Terrorism, 66% of Fox Republicans think it's critical, and 45% of Americans do. And again, in all of these areas, non-Fox Republicans are closer to all Americans than they are to Fox News Republicans.
Okay. Football all Americans we're talking about.
Foreign interference in presidential elections, there's a good one. 49% of Americans think it's a big deal, but only 26% of Fox News Republicans do.
Ah, right. Well, they think it's a good deal.
Right. 43% of Americans think racial inequality is a big deal. Getting to 50, not quite there. 14% of Fox News Republicans think so. If you watch the White Power Hour every night with Tucker Carlson, you're not going to think that.
In 2 hours. They got another one.
Right. Climate change, same thing. 43% of Americans think it's a big deal. Needs to be closer to 50. 6% of Fox News Republicans think it's a big deal. These Fox News Republicans, says Natalie Jackson, love Trump and hate Democrats more than other Republicans. How many people, for example, Fox News Republicans, trust Joe Biden to provide accurate and trustworthy information about the coronavirus pandemic? How many Fox News Republicans trust Joe Biden to provide accurate and trustworthy? 0, and that's not rounded down.
That's bad. I was going to say, well, my guess would be 0, but I'm sure it's like 14. No? Really? 0. Okay.
The report also looks at issues of racial justice and attitudes toward immigrants and immigration policy. These are the people Trump would want to take away from Fox News if he starts his own media outlet. And looking at this report, it's not clear why he would, because these people already love him. But
save your money.
It's just weird in the sense of why do Republicans still love Donald Trump? Because they get their news from Fox News. And again, that's the battlefield that Georgia's going to be fought out, and 2022 is going to be fought out. So you need to know it so that you can work on countering it. And it's not going to be easy because there's a whole the difference is it's not going to be state media after January 20th. It's just going to be Fox News.
Right. Right. I have trouble understanding what's going to happen in the future with Fox News, only because
Well, they're going to fight with OANN or
Yeah.
whatever Trump
Right,
outlet,
they spent the
and
weekend-
so it's going to be Dems in disarray, except on the Republican side.
but it's going to be reported as Dems anyway.
Of course, well, by them.
Right. By New York Times will tell you you're in disarray.
Well,
Don't
New York
worry about
Times will
that.
get in on it too, but
It's probably one of the
it's a different
puzzle
it's a different
answers.
dynamic when their party is lost, and
How
so
many
you have to
letters?
reconcile the fact with everything we told you turns out not to be true. We told you there's no climate problem and your town's on fire. You get to a certain point. We told you there's no pandemic and your hospital just collapsed.
Yes.
It gets to a point where even the Republican governors have to push mask mandates, like in North Dakota.
Right. It's happening. True.
Right. So,
Kansas is
it's an
added
interesting
to that now.
dynamic. But again, this goes back to how come Biden won by 6 million votes, but he didn't win by more than 6 million votes, because he was running against an incumbent president with state media, an incredible amount of forces arrayed against a challenger winning, and won anyway.
Yes.
Bigly.
They were arrayed in disarray, though. That's the problem.
Array. Well, as they lose,
Yes.
they become even more in disarray. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Okay. Well, like I said, look
But
out
when
for
you
it
win,
in the New York
imagine what
Times.
would happen if he had won. Fox News would be more powerful than ever,
Yes.
and so it would be
Maybe.
like North Korea indoctrination.
I guess so. I mean, I guess if they had won, then
I don't want to go there, though.
yeah. Okay. Well, Paul Waldman did the other day. We'll
Yeah.
touch on that in a second. But yeah, I want to note for the record that the Trumpers who were out in protests and rallies over the last weekend spent an inordinate amount of time making sure that television cameras captured them saying Fox News sucks, and people being interviewed saying, I don't even listen, I hate Fox News, they're too liberal now. And that's a whole separate fight, but it is just kind of interesting to watch alongside. So, and even the people who said they hated Fox News just said, well, I still watch Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, but the rest
The
of Fox
entertainment
News sucks.
value,
Yeah.
right? Because, I watched All in the Family because, I really like Archie Bunker. So just to give you an idea how things are going there, and this is how I'll end the segment. This is James Hohmann tweeting this morning. Brad Raffensperger he's the Secretary of State in Georgia who is resisting Lindsey Graham's appeals to be corrupt.
Right.
And they're the ones that are having the count announced at noon while Trump is having
The
his
count.
counter programming.
Right.
So James Hohmann tweets, James Hohmann from the Washington Post, Brad Raffensperger's wife got these texts on her cell this week. You better not botch this recount. Your life depends on it. Your husband deserves to face a firing squad. The Raffenspergers should be put on trial for treason and face execution.
Yes.
That's from a Washington Post story. And conservative columnist Josh Kraushaar tweets that and says, despicable behavior enabled by President Trump. Flat out, this sucks. That's what happens when you lose.
Yeah. And Dems in disarray. But
Well, that'll be his next column.
Right.
But, again, the point is when you lose,
yes.
people start to sort of get away from your orbit, try to figure out how to get off that train before it crashes.
Okay.
And it's happening, and that's why you see governors with the mask mandates.
Right.
And that's why you see people like Chris Krebs, Maynard G. Krebs, who, is actually a hero. And, said, I'm going to do my job and I'm going to make sure that there's no election interference. And I'm going to tell people that there hasn't been any and that's been a fair election and I'll get fired for it and I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah. Well done there. And same for Raffensperger.
Now we just need that from GSA Emily.
And everybody, of course, I think inherently knows, but just throw it out there. They may have been awful at some point in the past. Don't be disappointed if that's the case. Take the good for what it is and say, oh, well done there. Pat on the
Right.
head.
You don't want to think
matter
of them
anymore,
as a hero. Think of them as doing something heroic.
Yeah. All right. Fine.
Then you just look at the action. You don't have to worry about the
Yeah.
the flawed person.
I don't think
We're all
anybody's
flawed,
gonna have a
who
problem
wound
with
up doing that sort of thing.
Right. But somebody will tell you later that you're a hypocrite because they also did this awful thing. And you say, I don't care about that. I'm saying this one thing was good. Okay, good. You're off the hook. Just be prepared. I'm just putting out rules. I have a gavel. I'm thinking ahead to what the other side is going to do. And I would like to fortify
And
you
let's
against
just end this the way we started it. This is Andrew Prokop, who is a political science, a politics correspondent at Vox.com. That's how he describes himself.
Where?
AP reports that Trump reached out to all
Trump.
the Wayne County GOP campuses after they backed down.
Oh,
So now they're
two.
trying to back down from backing down. Or as the
What?
AP says, quote, a person familiar with the matter said Trump reached out to the canvassers Monica Palmer and William Hartman on Tuesday evening after the revised vote to express gratitude for their support. Then on Wednesday, Palmer and Hartman signed affidavits saying they believe the county vote should not be certified. So Trump is trying to interfere with the election.
Yes. Okay, that is documented. We can say
And
that
that's
much.
why they all of a sudden changed their mind.
Yeah, the president of the United States asked me to. So.
Yes, and besides, something jobs in the future, something.
Yeah, maybe another issue to address going forward, and something I think I parked away there too. All right, I have
Right.
ideas for
I'm
the next
laughing
hour.
at this
is good.
Roxanne Gay. Remember we talked about Grosse Pointe and the barriers there?
Yeah.
She just retweeted, LOL, Grosse Pointe, that hotbed of rebellion.
Well, apparently they can hide behind those barriers with muskets and
Right.
tricorn
I'll
hats.
send you the barrier story. It's pretty fascinating with pictures, but it's like, it was like Martha Stewart
we have those.
decorations. They went from fences to giant planters on the streets,
Ah,
to block
very
people from
nice
coming, but they made it look pretty.
yeah. They have yet to beautify the 15 fences around the White House, but if they had time, maybe they would get to that.
Well,
Although,
the people
they're
have
not
done
gonna
that.
decorate
They've
it.
decorated them.
That's true, right? And
With all sorts
Melania
of
would
things
try
like
to
you lost,
decorate
get
it.
out, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they should have thought of that ahead of time too, but they didn't. They left it up to everybody else on the other side of the fence to do the decorating. Not wise. Okay, well, yeah, we have a couple of those barrier areas around here too, so I understand it. I'd like to see the pictures. It's always nice to see a nice planter, well executed. Okay, well, let's see. Plenty to ponder and not ponder in the next segment on uncertainty in the universe. But okay, thanks. This wow. Well, lots to digest, and I guess now it's just a matter of time watching the gavels come down. And
Well, we got the main thing I think to remember are the certification dates, and a lot of them are Friday and Monday of next week. But the Georgia recount's going to be a key issue today, so that happens at noon.
Okay. Yeah, well, things to keep an eye on and deadlines. It gives people things to do with their day. How to plan watching deadlines come and go.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
Take care,
Very
and
good.
I'll talk to you on Monday, which is another deadline day.
Yeah, right.
That'll be Michigan, for example.
Right, true. And also about time for a new round of Republican congressmen to get COVID, which I think we're watching as well. We'll have to run through that list perhaps in the next segment. But I think we had two more yesterday, and I'm just watching.
The one I'm worried about is Chuck Grassley.
Yes, he's in danger.
Like old.
Yes, right. And as a matter of fact,
87.
he's popped
It's
up
not
on
a
my
good
screen.
thing to get COVID when you're 87.
No, avoid it at all times. But yes, if you're 87, avoid it especially. And up on my screen at the moment, the Liz Lenz tweet, including a picture of Chuck Grassley in frame here with Congresswoman-elect Ashley Hinson and Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, taken on November 2nd, and now Grassley and Hinson both are COVID positive, and I guess we're waiting to find out whether the Iowa governor is too. But
I mean, these folks are
mandate to
like
come.
incorrigible. There was Martha McSally's goodbye speech, and then she had her whole staff without masks, including her without masks, on the Capitol steps, taking one of those pictures for the ages, and the sergeant at arms had to come and break it up and say this is not
Get out of
acceptable under our social distancing rules.
Nice. All right. So a goodbye, cruel world speech is what she made it do. Okay.
Yeah, I have to go, but I'm taking my staff with me.
Right. She's an Egyptian princess. You see.
Yeah, for all
She's gonna be
time.
buried
And we're
with
going to
all of them.
entomb them. We're going to do it, like those, what do they call it? The clay soldiers in China.
You should just make a staff full of clay soldiers. Yeah,
Exactly.
so we'll
And then we'll
entomb
just
you.
all get entombed together because, that's the deal.
And so they think it's forever. That's the rule they set for themselves. I'm just saying
Terracotta,
it's uncertainty.
that's the word I was searching
right.
for.
Okay. Well, in
It turns
2,500
out
years,
all the
we'll
staffers,
unentomb
in
you.
fact, are terracotta. You're terracotta. You were a staffer. Who knew?
Disinter you. Yeah. Right.
Just animated by some, ancient curse, and then when that runs out, you just crumble back into the terracotta statues. And they're all going to get
Figure
buried
out.
together with their congressman because, like, that's the job, right?
Right. It's said to be for eternity, but I'll tell
You
you,
know.
archaeologists do not respect eternity.
Exactly right. Take care, and I'll
I don't know
talk to
what
you
that means.
on Monday, if in fact there is a Monday.
Right. And
You can't be certain in this
true,
universe.
right. A judge could rule it's Tuesday or Sunday part 2 by the
Yeah.
time we get there. We'll see what the rules are. Okay.
It's a day that ends in Y. What difference does it make whether
Right,
it's
that's-
Monday or Tuesday? Where in the Constitution does it say that that's how you have to do
I
it?
mean, that could be all that's necessary. Is it you think it's Monday? They both end in Y. What's the problem? What are you protesting here?
Exactly right. Take care, and I'll talk to you at some point next week, assuming there's a next week.
Right. You think it's the future. I'll humor you. Go for it.
That's
You
why we
think
have
time
rules.
is linear. Go on.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Right. That's all you can do at this point is just take off and head for the hills. Nothing. It's not that LOL YOLO nothing matters. It's just that I can't find anything that matters. But I need a different word for it so that we don't break the don't say LOL YOLO nothing matters. I think we can work around it. All right. Let's see. Who else has COVID? I forgot to put aside because I guess ultimately I didn't care. 2 other Republican members of Congress who have it, and I forget who they are, and who gives a damn. Well, I'll say this: I didn't put it aside because they weren't big mouth denialists. They might be small mouth denialists who've been running around very quietly in their corner of the universe, insisting that it doesn't exist or that masks give you COVID or whatever. And now they have COVID. There's a pretty good chance that that's the case because they continue to identify as Republicans at this particular moment in time, which is usually pretty indicative of, yes, I'm willing to knuckle under and reject science in favor of the gospel of Donald J. Trump. Maybe they've been resistors to it the whole time, and that would be great and admirable and brave, and we wish you good luck because you've got a deadly disease now, and we hope you come out the other side of it. On the other hand, I might be wrong. They could be low-key denialists, in which case, to hell with you, and I hope they throw your body off a cliff. Does that sum things up nicely? I don't know whether you're all on board. You don't have to be. All right, I'll be right back. All right, welcome back after the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and my 1 minute was not enough for me to call up who were the latest Republican members to say they had COVID, and I think probably I went looking the wrong way. Let me try it this way. Republicans and COVID. I don't know. I'm going to just search via Twitter. I didn't put it aside because they weren't like big names, and at this point you could eat up your whole broadcast with the names of the idiots who are catching COVID. I don't know whether they did anything wrong in particular, whether they were flouting the rules or what have you, but Twitter is in general clogged with reports. There it goes. I figured if I scroll fast enough, eventually the pictures of the two of them side by side will come up. Here it is from yesterday's CNN breaking news Twitter feed. Representatives Dan Newhouse, a Republican of Washington State, and Doug Lamborn, Republican of Colorado, both tested positive. And as I mentioned, there is the representative-elect. Was it Hinson? Was that the name that I saw? Yes, Ashley Hinson here in the photo that I'll share with you with Chuck Grassley. So, I don't know. Chuck Grassley, super spreader, to no one's surprise. Okay, let's see. What else how can we weave together a serious and cohesive narrative for today when nothing matters? There's no way to do it. You can only describe the phenomena you are observing at the time. Is that phenomenological? I don't know. Anyway, we'll have to check on. I'll ask my son, who's taking philosophy classes now at college. Really live in-person classes and everything, which end Friday, which I guess brings me to the housekeeping segment of today's show. I don't know what the hell's going to happen tomorrow and what you're going to hear. It's my inclination, quite frankly. Split as usual. Lots to cover and so many stories that it would be a shame to leave you without a brand new show. but at the same time, to hell with it. Now, I'm exhausted, and maybe we should take the day off when we run a rerun and take a look back about a year or so and see. What would be really interesting would be to take a look back to last year at the utter chaos that was visited upon us by Donald Trump and his lackeys in the allegedly in the government, and think about how pleasant and calm that would be by comparison to what we have now. And we'll yearn for days past, false nostalgia for a past that never existed. Generally a theme, even beyond the Trump administration. Anyway, let's see. We'll jump back into Pocket and see what I've put aside for us. Random news that I saw this morning on Twitter, thanks to the tweets of Ben Gittleson covering the White House for ABC News, is how he describes himself in Twitter. We'll take his word for it. Kyle Rittenhouse, the jackass kid who shot everybody in Kenosha during the protests there, in a jailhouse interview, which likely should never take place, but, an interesting nugget was uncovered. Get this. He says he used coronavirus stimulus money to buy his gun. Now, of course, he was out there protesting against extraordinary measures taken in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. I don't know how he felt, being a conservative type of fellow, perhaps. He might even have opposed the idea of handing out stimulus money. Or maybe he was just there to say, what we need is more stimulus money and less lockdown. Of course, the stimulus money was there to try and help offset the effects of the lockdown. But anyway, you get the idea. It's an unfortunate situation. I don't think any of us intended for that money to be used that way. But hey, freedom in America. Sounds like an interesting interview, perhaps, even though you shouldn't be interviewing criminals this way in general. But sometimes you uncover something fun and interesting this way. So that's not the focus of the interview. The headline will give you a better picture of that. Kenosha, how two men's paths crossed in an encounter that has divided the nation. It's been the practice over the past couple of days and weeks as Trumpers show up for protests elsewhere to insist that they are pro Kyle Rittenhouse and that Kyle Rittenhouse did nothing wrong, yada, yada. And then, of course, to yell at you when you say things like, Rand Paul's neighbor did nothing wrong. Well, how dare you? That's outrageous. Just one of many ridiculous inconsistencies out there. Won't change your mind about anything, but I recommend the piece to you, and I'll at least have Ben Gittleson's tweet that leads to that piece for you to review after the show today. Let's see. Other fun and interesting items, right? Okay, let's see. One, just sort of, I guess, hearkening back to Trump's past. Whose tweets am I looking at here? Elizabeth Spires, who has helpfully put the pronunciation of her name in her Twitter bio here. Editor-in-chief, formerly, of the New York Observer, that newspaper that Jared Kushner bought and operated anyway. Whether profitably or not, I don't know. But at any rate, she writes here that Trump's transition team the first time around, when he was said to have won in 2016, was also a disaster, and now he's trying to sabotage Biden's transition. Some excerpts she shares here from Michael Lewis's The Fifth Risk, a book about which I know next to nothing, but is interesting sounding nonetheless. What an intriguing title. The Fifth Risk is about the Trump, or at least this part of it is about the 2016-17 Trump transition. Spires notes that Chris Christie, who was nominally, originally, in charge of Trump's transition, so it fell to him, it was his responsibility to explain to Trump that he was legally required to have a transition team and transition plan, and apparently he didn't like that idea for some reason. I read a part of this excerpt, and I'm not sure I understand what Trump is thinking or talking about in all of this, but it hardly matters. Trump's reaction first is the first screen grab here. She just took pictures of the book, and it looks like it's just pictures of the book, but it's so nicely, neatly highlighted, it makes me think that perhaps it was digitally done in some way. Christie had to explain to Trump that he was legally required to have a transition team / plan. Trump's reaction when Christie et al., there were others, put one together, a transition team and a plan. Here's the excerpts here. It leads in this way before the highlighting begins. That Steve Bannon enters the picture, steps off an elevator somewhere to find the governor of New Jersey, that's Christie, seated on a sofa being hollered at. Now the highlighted portion reads, Trump was apoplectic, actually yelling, and I'll have to censor just a little bit, "You're stealing my money! You're stealing my effing money! What the F is this?" And, I know he's angry about having to have a plan because he hates planning anything. I'm not clear at all what Trump is even talking about. Like, what money? What money does he think is his money here? Like campaign dollars? Is that what he's worried about? I don't know. Seeing Bannon, Trump turned on him and screamed, "Why are you letting him steal my effing money?" Bannon and Christie together set out to explain to Trump federal law. Because why would the president know federal law, right? Months before the election, the law said, the nominees of the two major parties were expected to prepare to take control of the government. The government supplied them with office space in downtown Washington, D.C., along with computers and trash cans and so on. That's an interesting thing to throw in there. They gave us computers and trash cans. Do you know any of the other things that we get? Besides office space, computers, and refrigerator salamis? I don't know. Trash cans, yes. Desks, rulers, staplers. I was told I could keep my stapler. Pens, pencils, I don't know. Trash cans. All right. It's an interesting look into the headspace of the people who described this scene, anyway, to the author. The government supplied them with office space in downtown Washington, D.C., along with computers and trash cans, and so on. But the campaigns paid their people. To which Trump replied, "F the law. I don't give a F about the law. I want my effing money." Bannon and Christie tried to explain that Trump couldn't have both his money and the transition. And I guess, again, I'm unclear. I guess Trump is thinking that campaign contributions that have been made to this point, the campaign now being over, any money that's left in the campaign coffers belongs to Donald J. Trump personally. And if I have to use that to pay people for a transition, I'll just not have a transition. But the law says you have to. But it doesn't have to be competent or paid. Watch this. I guess. Shut it down, said Trump. Shut down the transition. Now the page screen grab ends with here Christie and Bannon parted ways. And I don't know what happens after they part ways. But the next excerpt is up, and I don't know if it's a direct continuation. But Spires describes this next section as, well, then they fired the transition team. Noting up at the top here without highlighting it, Trump always avoided firing people himself. The man who played Mr. You're Fired on TV avoided personal confrontation in real life. We found that out in the first couple months of his presidency when he fired people by tweet or had someone else do it, etc., etc. The surprise was that it was being done now, just when the work of the transition team was most critical. Only when Christie threatened to go down and tell reporters that Steve Bannon had fired him did Bannon concede it was Jared. I would like to have seen more about the run-up to that. But apparently, Elizabeth Spires thinks the important part is here, beginning with this highlighting. In the days after the election, the people in the building on 17th and Pennsylvania, that would be where the transition offices were meant to move to another building in downtown Washington, a kind of White House in waiting. They soon discovered that the lists that they had created of people to staff the Trump administration were not the lists that mattered. See, there are two gavels in this situation, and it's helpful to think of it this way. But again, what's happened here is the people in the building on 17th and Pennsylvania are the transition staff that the two candidates, whether it looks like they're going to win or not, and months in advance of the election, are required to have to start the process of transition. We usually think of the transition and transition teams as something that exists post-election day, once there is a winner projected or, in fact, declared, and then there's a rush to put together a transition team. This is actually sort of a second version of the transition team. There is apparently a team working months and months ahead of time to prepare for an actual transition. And they're putting together lists of people and ideas for staffing the various cabinet departments, etc., so that it isn't, in fact, something that you just make up in the few days following a November election and you're just scrambling. There's lots of last-minute work to be done, to be sure, once something like this becomes a reality, but there's a lot of preparatory work which is done ahead of time. So I guess at some point after the election, the people that have been at 17th and Pennsylvania, and both campaigns, for all I know, might both be housed in the same building because it's a much smaller transition team. But I guess post-election, the transition is, okay, now the winner takes their team from 17th and Pennsylvania and moves into these offices elsewhere, which are bigger and have more trash cans, I guess, and other objects of importance for whatever reason. And then you do the real work of, okay, well, now we have to really put together the landing teams who are going to show up at the departments with the blessing of the GSA and move in and learn the ropes and prepare to take over the reins of these various departments. Those lists of people are prepared by the team at 17th and Pennsylvania. And, of course, they put themselves on the list of, yes, now we get to move into this new building and continue the work of giving you more lists of people that you should expect at the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, et cetera, et cetera. These are the people that you should expect to be there. Give them computers and trash cans, right? Now, they soon discovered that the lists that they had created of people to staff the Trump administration were not the lists that mattered. There was now this other list of people allowed into the new building, and most of their names weren't on it. Now, normally I think you would allow the people in 17th and Pennsylvania to create the list of who's allowed in the new building. But Trump, I guess, took it on himself. One way of firing the people who were involved in the early parts of the transition would be to say the list of people who get into the new official post-election transition offices will be made by us, the campaign. Here is the list. And if we can't fire these people, we can at least decline to put their names on the list, and look what happens. People showed up at the new building and said, let me in, and the Secret Service would say, sorry, you're not on the list. That is an actual quote from a civil servant who worked in the new building. It wasn't just Chris Christie who'd been fired. It was the entire transition team, though no one ever told them so directly. It was just, again, in one of those office space situations where they just say, yeah, we're moving you into the closet downstairs and we're not paying you anymore or whatever. Or maybe, I forget how the office space scenario went. I guess nobody processed the payroll on Milton or what have you, and they just left them there. Here they just say, well, you're not allowed into the building, and we're not going to tell you ahead of time that you're fired. We're not going to tell you ahead of time that you won't be allowed into the building. We're going to let you proceed as though you thought that Monday was just another day, just to tie this back to the exit that we had with Greg a few minutes ago. It's just when you show up on Monday, you're not allowed into the building. Why not? Am I fired? I don't know. All I know is you're not allowed in the building. I'm a little more intrigued with the beginning of this piece now, where Christie threatens to go down to tell reporters that Steve Bannon had fired him, and then Bannon says, well, you can go down and tell him that if you want to. But the truth is it was Jared. Jared did it, and I believe that. Jared, you'll remember, he has a great antipathy for Chris Christie for putting his dad in jail. Anyway, Spires has more excerpts for us, and they're fun, so let's take a look at another couple of them here. This one says, meanwhile, at the DOE, here's what's going on. The full page reads, on the morning after the election, November 9th, 2016, the people who ran the U.S. Department of Energy turned up in their offices and waited. They had cleared 30 desks, and probably trash cans as well, and freed up 30 parking spaces, because I guess the people at 17th and Pennsylvania had told them you can expect 30 people from the Trump administration, the incoming administration, to show up as the landing team. Well, you know what happens. It's implied here, and we've heard the story before. They didn't know exactly how many people they'd host that day. Okay. But whoever won the election would surely be sending a small army into the Department of Energy and into every other federal agency. The morning after he was elected president 8 years earlier, Barack Obama had sent between 30 and 40 people into the Department of Energy. So pick a number. 30. Clear the desks. Get me 30 trash cans stat, they said. And then the people said, we're not medical. We don't know what you mean. Okay, here's the highlighted part. The Department of Energy staff planned to deliver to Trump's people the same talks from the same 5-inch thick 3-ring binders with the Department of Energy seal on them that they would have given to the Clinton people. Nothing had to be changed, said one former Department of Energy staffer. They'd all been done always with the intention that either party wins, nothing changes. Same information, because good faith, and that's the rules. But Trump, of course, I guess the foreshadowing here is Trump will not be delivering anything to anybody and will absolutely give them bad or just outright wrong information because they're Biden people, if he allows them into those buildings at all. Well, anyway, you can guess what happened with the clearing 30 desks and 30 trash cans. Nobody showed up. Teams were going around saying, have you heard from them? Recalls another staffer who had prepared for the transition. Have you gotten anything? I haven't gotten anything. The election happened, remembers Elizabeth Sherwood Randall, then Deputy Secretary at DOE, and he won. They're talking about Trump. He didn't, but that's what we say about this stuff in history. And then there was radio silence. We were prepared for the next day, and then nothing happened. Across the federal government, the Trump people weren't anywhere to be found. The few places they did turn up, they appeared confused and unprepared. A small group attended a briefing at the State Department, for instance, only to learn that the briefings they needed to hear were classified, and none of the Trump people had security clearance, or for that matter, any experience in foreign policy. And so they weren't allowed to receive an education. Now, the highlighted bit, on his visits to the White House soon after the election, Jared Kushner expressed surprise that so much of its staff seemed to be leaving. It was like he thought it was a corporate acquisition or something, says an Obama White House staffer. He thought everyone just stayed. Even in normal times, the people who take over the United States government can be surprisingly ignorant about it. As a longtime career civil servant in the Department of Energy who has watched 4 different administrations and things cut off here, that's too bad. But I guess it won't surprise you that people who come in brand new often don't know exactly what the hell's going on. One more excerpt being shared here by Elizabeth Spires. This after sending DOE employees a list of questions about political loyalties and views on climate change. I guess that was the first action of the incoming Trump administration. So, let's see. Blah, blah, blah. He was, whoever it was, he was replaced by a handful of young ideologues who called themselves the Beachhead Team. Now the highlighting. They mainly ran around the building insulting people, says a former Obama official. There was a mentality that everything that government does is stupid and bad, and the people in it are stupid and bad, says another. They demanded to know the names and salaries of the 20 highest paid people in the national science labs overseen by the Department of Energy. They'd eventually delete the contact list with the email addresses of all the DOE-funded scientists, apparently to make it more difficult for them to communicate with one another. These people were insane, says the former DOE staffer. They weren't prepared. They didn't know what they were doing. Interesting. And then they go on to explain, we desperately tried to prepare them, but that required them to show up and bring qualified people, which they didn't do. So that's it. They didn't even ask for an introductory briefing like, what do you do? They just walked in there and said, I don't know, let's destroy a bunch of stuff. Anyway, Elizabeth concludes here just saying there's lots more in the book, but at any rate, the Trump administration crippled a lot of government functions by failing to staff the government properly, and general bumbling incompetence around the transition, I would say, was probably pretty calculated. Now they're trying to sabotage Biden's, and they're actually in a position to do so. They're actively trying to break the government more on the way out the door. I don't think it's even ideological, like a la Bannon. She says it's petty and malicious and rooted in jealousy and revenge. How fun. I did happen to see, and I don't know whether I put it aside or not. It's just an avalanche of things I have here in pocket, but somebody mentioning that they had heard from multiple sources inside the Trump quote-unquote administration that the exit strategy, such as it was to light as many fires as possible so that there were just too many for an incoming Biden administration to put out effectively. It's really rather remarkable. And maybe I can find that quote pretty quickly via Twitter where I saw it the first time. Let's see. I don't remember exactly how they put it, and so I don't know if... there we are. Ben Collins of NBC News reporting this, among others. A second official tells CNN, this is a quote, a second official tells CNN, their goal is to set so many fires that it will be hard for the Biden administration to put them all out. Linking here to the CNN piece, which makes the same claim in the title here. Trump team looks to box in Biden on foreign policy in particular by lighting too many fires to put out. It's not a good situation. And it's the sort of thing that, again, will make the historians of the future marvel at the fact that we here in the current times did not drag Donald Trump out of the White House and hang him. People will wonder why that didn't happen. But the important thing is that it won't, because that's the way you stay on the right side of legality. And even if you believe that it ought to happen and might happen in a different country where they cared less about civility and the process of orderly transition, let's say. Okay, let's see. I mentioned earlier, now we're running up against our time limitations here, but I did mention earlier that Paul Waldman had written a piece in the Washington Post about what might have happened, or how close did Donald Trump actually come to winning. And we have noted this in the last couple of days that though, again, Biden put together the 306 electoral vote margin, just as Trump did the first time, just as was the case then, there are states in which the vote was relatively close and could have swung the other way. And had it swung the other way with just a small number of votes in strategically located states, we could be talking about another popular vote, an overwhelming popular vote loss for Donald Trump. I guess a little bit less overwhelming if the few, if the 100,000 votes swing the other way, but still, the difference is in the millions. And yet a 306 or whatever, a bare minimum of at least 270 electoral votes cobbled together, barely, to make him allegedly president of the United States. So perhaps we'll dive into that one on the other side of the break. Let's see. Here's another interesting bit here that we can share. A Twitter thread put together by now, I guess, former or soon-to-be former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel Powell. She was actually the one that we noted the other day was in one of the strategic calls post-election complaining that nobody knew how to pronounce her name. I don't. And, it's an interesting one. Anyway, she put together a very interesting thread saying, many have commented on Democratic losses in South Florida and with Latinos across the country. We have. As the Congresswoman from Florida's 26th district who lost her seat, and the first South American immigrant ever elected to Congress. Did you know that? Let me set the record straight. Well, I don't know that we're going to get into all the way through this, but let me begin to let her set the record straight. My district voted for Clinton by 16 percentage points and Trump now by 6%. That's a dramatic swing, a 22-point swing at the top of the ticket, not easily explained by, she says, this false narrative of progressive versus moderates. Interesting. I won by 2% in 2018 and lost by 3% in 2020. Despite this swing, I was one of just a few Democrats nationally to outperform Biden. And here's why. She gives 4 points here. Focused on the economy, knocked on 23,000 doors and had conversations with 133,000 people via phone and text. You know, all the usual mechanics of a normal campaign. We'll get to the other two next. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I was rudely interrupted as we were reading through, now we'll have to say the name again, Debbie Mucarsel Powell. And her, that's the way it's spelled. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it correctly. She says nobody does. And the temptation is to reverse some of those consonants and come up with something more easily pronounceable. Anyway, she was saying that despite the swing in her district, that is to say that it went for Clinton by 16% and then swung to Trump this time by 6%, a 22-point swing, she says nonetheless that she was just one of just a few Democrats nationally to outperform Biden in their district. She says the reason is her 4-point plan here, focusing on the economy, which is interesting, debatable in some other districts. Knocked on 23,000 doors and had conversations with 133,000 people via phone and text. Invested big in radio, mail, digital, and TV. And fourth, did it all in English and Spanish. Good plan. Very traditional, not innovative, I don't think, in any way. But one of the big differences, of course, here, at least I can say, is the door-to-door canvassing, which went away in a lot of districts because of the COVID concerns. That keeps coming up in people's analyses, by the way. She goes on, though, to say, I was a leader in advocating for Venezuelan freedom, and as an immigrant, my story is the Miami story, but it wasn't enough, because South Florida is extremely diverse. We are unique, and when others try to treat Latinos as a monolithic group, we've been warned about this, they miss the nuances. Though having read over this thread, I'm not clear how she addressed those nuances, but that might not be the point of this thread. But we'd like another thread, if you'd like to put that one together for us. Yes, the fear of socialism is real and ingrained, it says, for engrained, grained. I don't know, that may be a word, not one I use. But anyway, for those of us who fled dangerous places in search of the American dream, my own father, she says, was murdered by a criminal with a gun in Ecuador. I don't know how it follows unless the criminal with the gun was, granted it by some socialist program or something. I don't know. It's tragic, but I don't really understand the connection. But do I have to? Anyway, she goes on to say, it's not why I lost, and it's not the only reason South Florida went red. There were many factors. A targeted disinformation campaign to Latinos. That, I believe. Easy enough. An electorate desperate to reopen. racked with fear over the economic consequences. A national party that thinks racial identity is how we vote. It's not just about socialism. Okay, so I understood there to be a complaint about the way the National Democratic Party, I suppose, views Latinos, and we've been over that problem. I'm having difficulty integrating it into the rest of these other factors here. Florida and National Dems, she says, our brightest days are ahead. To get there, we must step back and deeply analyze how we're talking to Latinos and every voter. As the first South American immigrant elected to Congress, I stand with you as we do it. And to South Florida and the Keys, it has been the honor of my life to serve you. I love this community from Key West to the Upper Keys to South Miami. I'll keep fighting to make sure no one messes with my people. Please stay safe, wear a mask, and enjoy the holidays. And it is, as Norm Ornstein then afterwards comments, an important thread, but I think in need of some further clarification. I just wanted to throw that out there. Maybe Armando hears and understands this in a different way than I do. Maybe you hear and understand this in a different way. I'd love for someone to offer up some clarifications and further thoughts about what she has to say, but she seems an important personage, and I thought I would share those thoughts and ponder them a little bit before moving on to Paul Waldman's piece, chiefly because it was promised to you earlier. We came much closer to an election catastrophe than many realize. Yikes. And it's illustrated with an equally yikes-inducing photo of Rudy Giuliani. He was very scary looking in this one. Here's the piece. As President Trump refuses to concede that he lost the election, and his dead-enders trot out increasingly bizarre conspiracy theories and legal tantrums, we are witnessing an attack on democracy that is at turns sickening and comical, but as it turns more the latter than the former, we should be aware of how close we came to catastrophe. You may look at President-elect Joe Biden's 306 to 232 lead in the Electoral College and his popular vote lead of 5.8 million votes and growing, and say that thankfully the results weren't that close. As my colleague Greg Sargent wrote before the election, Trump's legal strategy was predicated on getting him within, quote, cheating distance, with the margins narrow enough that he could convince Republican judges to intercede on his behalf and hand him the election. It hasn't happened, but it was closer than you think. And it may yet be closer than you think, by the way. I think I put away somewhere, and certainly I can come up with it on Twitter again, a look inside some of the pleadings in the various cases being filed around the country in which the Trump team is basically saying, yes, the relief we seek here is for the judge to declare Donald Trump the winner of this state's election and to award these electoral votes to him. It's just straight up reverse everything, turn it on its head. That's what I'm asking you to do. It's pretty surprising to see it in print, as our Twitter friend NYC Southpaw put it. It's just sort of shocking to see hanging out there. It hasn't happened, but it was closer than you think. Paul is talking here chiefly about the how close it was for some of the states to have legitimately awarded their electoral votes to Donald Trump. But I should caution you that I still think, I worry that things are closer than you think. It shouldn't work. Judges who would allow it to work are idiots, but they are, in this culture and in this country, considered to be federal judges, and they have to be worked around if they say something like this. It might be easy to work around them. The appeals court might throw it out pretty quickly. Then comes the big question mark, the Supreme Court, and are they idiots and partisans or not? And no one knows. But we have some guesses, and they're not comforting. Okay, but Paul is saying it was closer than you think in the voting. And it raises the frightening possibility that if Trump's team were not such a bunch of buffoons, and if Republican officials at the state level were just a little more corrupt than they already are, he might have been able to steal the election after all. And now that I think about it, it might have been someone else's work that we cited the other day, I think, who said that the swing of the right 120,000 votes in the right 3 states could swing things the other way. And now looks like Paul's headed back to post-election maneuvering that, came closer to working than we thought. Now that, so again, if his team weren't such a bunch of buffoons, they might have been able to steal the election after all. And that's because the 2020 election was, in one critical way, even closer than 2016. You may remember that 4 years ago, Trump managed to win the Electoral College because he prevailed in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by a combined total of just 77,000 votes. That tiny margin was enough to overcome Hillary Clinton's 3 million vote lead in the popular vote and make him president with 304 electoral votes. Why? I forget what the old discrepancy was and why 306, but now I'm embarrassed to say, one, that I forgot what that controversy was, and two, that wasn't it the case then that he was running around saying, was it Trump running around saying 306, but it wasn't really 306, it was 304, or is this a mistake? I don't know. It's not central to the point, though, but if you remember, let me know. In the time since, Democrats have cited that number over and over, often as proof of the Clinton campaign's strategic missteps. How hard would it have been to grab 77,000 more votes? Right, I remember this. Couldn't they have done it with just a few more visits to those states? So, what's the analogous magic number for 2020? It's even smaller. Final tallies are being completed. Georgia is conducting a hand recount, and there could be a recount in Wisconsin if the Trump campaign decides to pay for one. I understand that they were offering up half of the upfront costs of that they were required to pay. And just a reminder to people in Wisconsin who are responsible for these things, don't take partial payment. It's not something you should do or trust Trump in doing. So, what's the analogous magic number in 2020? Final tallies are being completed, right? The recounts are underway, but the margins by which Biden won 3 critical states as of Wednesday morning are Arizona, where he won by 10,457 votes as of yesterday morning, Georgia by 14,028 votes, Wisconsin by 20,565 votes. The total there, 45,050 votes. That is somewhat less, let's say, than the 77,000 margin that determined the 2016 election. If we're thinking about whether Trump could make up any of those deficits in a recount, the answer is almost certainly no. Recounts seldom find mistakes that move more than a few hundred votes in one direction or another, and could just as easily make Biden's leads larger. But if Trump had managed to get those 45,000 votes, he would have won 37 more electoral votes, making the Electoral College a 269 to 269 tie. We have discussed that possibility in the past, even here at home. And there was a whole episode in which I had to explain, oh yeah, well there is this one coin flip, 1 out of a million, that lands on its side, and that's a whole different story. But anyway, yeah, we've all been aware of the fact that there could be a 269 to 269 tie. Under the Constitution, the election would have then been decided by the House of Representatives, with each state delegation getting just 1 vote. We've been over that. Even though Democrats have a majority in the House, more state delegations have Republican majorities, Trump would have been reelected. That's the bullet we just dodged, all because of 45,000 votes, which raises the question of whether Trump might still be able to convince elections officials and courts to toss out enough Democratic votes to pull it off. Now, the answer at this point is plainly no. Yeah. The simple reason is that there are no grounds to do so and no fraud to be found, despite Republicans' efforts. The suits they have filed around the country have been almost laughed out of court, but they are still trying. On Tuesday, the Trump campaign filed suit in Nevada that asked that Biden's 34,000 vote victory simply be nullified and the state's electoral votes be awarded to Trump, or at least given to neither candidate. In Pennsylvania, the increasingly unhinged Rudy Giuliani, appearing in court for the first time in decades, made an utter fool of himself, as the Associated Press described his performance. Over the next several hours, he fiddled with his Twitter account, forgot which judge he was talking to, and threw around wild, unsupported accusations about a nationwide conspiracy by Democrats to steal the election. And in Michigan, the Republican members of the Elections Board of Wayne County, which includes Detroit, initially refused to certify the results. One of them said that she'd be willing to certify those results from cities other than Detroit. It was a momentary lifting of the veil, as the GOP's belief that the votes of black people are inherently illegitimate became disturbingly explicit. We know what happened with that story. We know what's still happening with that story. After an outpouring of protests, the two Republicans relented and certified the results. But had they been more committed to giving Trump the election at all costs, we could have eventually found ourselves in the situation many feared, in which a state's Republican legislature simply decided to grant its electoral votes to Trump, no matter what the voters wanted. And again, even if they hadn't bothered to try to recant their votes, I am not positive that the state legislature couldn't, if they decided to do it, even if it would be ineffectual in the end, simply to take that vote and say, I know that we're not supposed to, by the rules, intercede in this, but we're going to anyway because no one can stop us. And I know that there are rules of law that could allow a judge to simply say, I know you voted this way, but it doesn't matter. These other things have happened, and you're only allowed to intercede if these things haven't happened. And they have, so therefore there's no role for you, so it doesn't matter what resolution you passed. Right? That would be a good judge handling things. A bad judge handling things would say, I know that the rules say that you only have a role if these things don't happen, and they did happen, and so therefore you don't have a role. But I'll bet I don't know, whatever, you make something up. I bet the founders would have wanted us to pay attention to what you have to say, and so I can't quite justify not taking into consideration the legal pronouncements of the state legislature. And I'm not willing to do that and either throw your hands up and say, I guess there's no electoral slate whatsoever, or just go the whole 9 yards and say, well, it's true that our state has certain laws, but the federal Constitution seems to say that the state legislature can determine the method by which the electors will be awarded. That's the interpretation that Republicans are hanging their hat on. There's all sorts of nuances like, well, the legislature did determine already years ago, decades ago, how the electoral votes would be awarded. They would be awarded by having an election in the state and counting the votes, and the popular vote winner in the election here in Michigan wins the electoral votes. The decision's already been made. The fact that you have decided after the election was already held that you didn't like the outcome of that and you want to pass a new law shouldn't obtain. This is, we already decided this would be the way it was done, and on November 3rd we did do this thing. The fact that you pass a new law afterwards doesn't undo what we did on the 3rd, normal people would say. But Trump judges might say the opposite. Well, it does. It doesn't say that there's a deadline on it. And it doesn't say that they can't step in and correct things when there's been obvious fraud. And even though there's no proof of any fraud, obvious or otherwise, I've just said the words obvious fraud, and I have a gavel. Now, it could be up to a appeals court to say, well, you shouldn't have a gavel. You should be impeached as a judge. You're an idiot, but they can't kick him out by themselves. All they can do is reverse the findings. But, of course, their findings, too, can be reversed, and there's only one court from which there is no appeal, and it just happens to be the case that it's been freshly stocked with intensely personally grateful idiots working on behalf of Donald Trump. I'm just throwing that out there again. Okay, so Paul concludes these things this way. At this point, it isn't going to happen, but what if, say, Trump had won Arizona and Georgia, which would have taken just 25,000 votes combined, and it was all up to Wisconsin? Crucial Waukesha, Wisconsin, right? Would the Republican legislators who engineered the country's most brutal partisan gerrymander, don't forget that that's what we're talking about up in Wisconsin, would they have respected the will of the voters enough to not just hand Trump the election? Fortunately, he concludes, we won't have to find out, but the fact that we came so close shows us how fragile this system is. Unless we find a way to fix it, we'll always live with the threat of a kind of stolen election, this kind of stolen election that Trump is still hoping he can pull off and still working to do it too. So, very important to keep in mind, because the truth is that it would have taken 45,000 legitimate votes going the other direction to create that crisis. It will take 5 idiots to create a totally different kind of crisis. And I know their names, and you know their names too, and you know the kind of people they are, and you know that there are certain things you shouldn't put past them. It's just, if you think it's, a close shave because, 25,000 plus a lawsuit or 45,000 in total votes being changed out of the millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people who went to the polls, not a hard thing to accomplish. How hard is it to accomplish 5 votes from people whose background you know very well? And you know very well that their background includes reasons to be incredibly grateful and loyal personally to Donald Trump. So, just to worry you and unsettle you a little bit more, I thought I would throw that one out there. Okay, let's see. Other stories that we can include in the final 10 minutes or so. How about this one? This seems like a good follow-up to all of this. I don't know whether we can fit it in or not, but the New York Times Magazine piece, very lengthy looking because it's a magazine piece, again, coming to us under the headline of Can America Restore the Rule of Law Without Prosecuting Trump? Because people are now worried about that. Apparently, op-ed the other day in, The Hill or something, apparently from a former committee counsel from the Watergate days, Judiciary Committee counsel from the Watergate days, saying maybe for the good of the country, Biden should consider doing the unthinkable and pardoning Trump. A lot of backlash, of course, as expected to that, but people are contemplating this crap. So the New York Times Magazine piece here, laid out in fancy fashion that makes everything confusing, but there it is. Jonathan Mahler, Mahler, is the author of the piece. It's illustrated with a mock-up of a dossier on a file on the trials that could take place prosecuting Trump, with a Trump photo paper clipped to the outside of a manila folder. Individual one, right? Donald Trump's potential criminal liability is the key to understanding his presidency, and when he leaves office, will present the country with a historic dilemma. I like going with an historic dilemma. No way we'll get through all of this one, but I'll give you a taste of it. It looks like a very lengthy piece. Early in November, as President Trump challenged the integrity of the election with baseless lawsuits, Joe Biden delivered his first speech as president-elect, declaring it a time to heal. It was a phrase that many Americans were surely longing to hear. Others of us were afraid of it, but okay. Given the precarious state of the nation's political culture, but it was also one that carried significant historical weight and possible implications for the future. When President Gerald R. Ford pardoned Richard Nixon for his role in the Watergate scandal, he too spoke about the need for healing. Ford titled his subsequent memoir, A Time to Heal. When President Lincoln delivered his second inaugural address during the waning days of the Civil War, he spoke in similar terms about the imperative to bind up the nation's wounds. Whether Biden intended to do so, his words provided an early signal about one of the first questions he's going to confront as president: what to do about Donald Trump. Biden faces many daunting challenges: mitigating the ongoing damage from the pandemic, repairing institutions, restoring faith in government. But how to deal with his predecessor's flagrant and relentless subversion of the rule of law is in many ways the most vexing. Last year, one of Trump's lawyers, William Consovoy, memorably argued in open court that a sitting president could shoot a man in public and not be prosecuted. The legal validity of this claim notwithstanding, there is nothing to protect a former president from prosecution. No ex-president has ever been indicted before, but no president has ever left office with so much potential criminal liability. As the election approached and the polls pointed to a Trump defeat, there was a growing sense that his moment of reckoning was coming. He was, after all, already the subject of a criminal investigation by the District Attorney of Manhattan, as well as a civil investigation by the Attorney General of New York State. Both of those inquiries concern his conduct as a private businessman. The bigger and infinitely more fraught question is how to address Trump's potentially criminal acts as a political candidate and president. Those would most likely be federal crimes that could only be prosecuted by the federal government. A president, Trump cavalierly called for the imprisonment of political opponents, shattering a long-standing democratic norm. This is not a precedent to follow lightly. Presidents have historically gone out of their way to avoid using the power of the office to pursue their political rivals. When President George H.W. Bush pardoned 6 Reagan White House officials who were involved in the Iran-Contra affair, he warned of a profoundly troubling development in the political and legal climate of our country, the criminalization of policy differences. Of course, really honestly, Bush was in no position to offer up that speech for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the Reagan White House officials were not his political enemies at all. They were his political cronies, and pardoning them means a very different thing. But okay, he's warning of this idea of the criminalization of policy difference. And we later saw that echoed in later Republican administrations where their acts were defended against accusations from Democrats as the criminalization of politics. A common refrain. Bush was sparing members of his own party. President Obama created what is perhaps an even more relevant precedent for Biden by choosing not to prosecute members of the George W. Bush administration who had authorized the unlawful torture of detainees. His nominee for Attorney General, Eric Holder, used the very same phrase, the criminalization of policy differences, when the issue came up during his House confirmation hearings. Over the summer, I asked David Cole, the National Legal Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, what he thought would happen to Trump if he lost the election. My gut is that you're very unlikely to see a federal prosecution, he told me. For me, the real accountability will be on November 3rd if he is sent packing from the White House. It was a sentiment that I heard from a lot of legal thinkers and former government officials in the months leading up to the election. The visions of Donald Trump in an orange jumpsuit were more fantasy than reality. His true moment of reckoning would happen at the ballot box, but the election has now come and gone, and Trump, along with most of his party and many millions of Americans, has refused to accept the results. Accountability feels as if it might be further away than ever. Now, that's a good point, and I was just going to throw in, though, that the upshot, by the way, of all these great legal minds, and they're right, generally speaking, the gut feeling and the better prediction here is that no, those prosecutions aren't going to happen because they never happen. And because we know they never happen, really the formulation of things all along should have been, you can't indict a sitting president, and you also won't indict a former president. So there's really no accountability whatsoever. And the only accountability you have, if there even is any accountability, if this counts, is at the ballot box. Now the new twist here is even that accountability might not work out. And what if judges say, the same judges who would probably even throw out those indictments even if they did happen post-presidency, what if they just say, well, there is no post-presidency. After all, he remains president. You can't indict a sitting president. You can't indict a president after he's thrown out of office. And you can't throw out of office a criminal president that you've been waiting to indict anyhow. So give that some thought. Anyway, that's all we're really going to be able to fit in for today. And it's an enormous and lengthy article, but I wanted to set up the stakes for you and give you some incentive to read through this thing. And again, another warning that this may be our last brand new show for the week. It really just depends on how the rest of the day goes. I've got stuff to do, but many more things that I wanted to share with you. And once again, I have the feeling that it'll get the better of me and end up costing me the rest of my day so that I can feel better about having tomorrow off if you have some new information. But regardless, we'll be back on Monday, no matter what the authorities and powers that be might decide to call the day when we return. And Greg will be with us. We'll get our feet back beneath us. I think we'll see how it goes. The weather might be warm enough for Trump to turn out for some more golf, but it's been a while since he left the White House. Maybe he wants some outside time, maybe not. Maybe Melania wants him out of the house. We'll see. Anyway, for the rest of the day's news and information that we might not have gotten to, do stay tuned, of course, for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. Here's an idea of what we might hear when you stay tuned. More about Krebs. Christopher Krebs, fired because his team made sure Putin was denied the ability to interfere in the 2020 election. Trump has fired him and bragged about it. So we'll get an update on that, and I'd like to know what he did and what sort of stops were put on Putin. What did he have in mind? I wonder if Krebs will tell us anything about that. On the rest of the menu, Rod Rosenstein, remember him? He told investigators to take no further action on Bill Barr's client just before he was confirmed as Attorney General. Who was that? Stay tuned and find out. GOP Senator Perdue profited off of stocks in a defense contractor while passing legislation to benefit them. He's just as bad as Kelly Loeffler. Birds of a feather, both running down in Georgia.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
How about this one? A federal judge has slammed Trump's new DACA rules as a sad and inappropriate use of executive authority. And moving on to the international scene, UK police arrested a 65-year-old man over IRA bombings of pubs in 1974, and much more, this time involving, get this, Canada, China, and Russia.